The Vorath had not known war for 12,000 years. Their homeworld of Serena's Prime was a place of endless calm, where soft lights drifted through crystal towers and no voice was ever raised in anger. They were the oldest species in the Galactic Council and the most respected. When other civilizations argued over territory or resources, the Vorath would simply watch with their large, luminous eyes and pulse gentle colors through their translucent skin. They never took sides. They never fought. They simply existed in a state of perfect peace. That other species found both admirable and slightly unnerving. Ambassador Keleth had served on the Galactic Council for 300 years. His body glowed with the deep indigo that came only with extreme age among his kind. And his movements were slow and deliberate, like a creature that had forgotten what it meant to hurry. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched young species burst onto the galactic stage with fire and ambition, only to burn themselves out within a few centuries. He had voted on the admission of 17 new species to the Council, and each time he had cast his vote without much thought. The patterns were always the same. Violent species destroyed themselves. Peaceful species were destroyed by others. The galaxy turned on, and the Vorath observed it all with quiet detachment. But when the humans arrived, Keleth felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt curious. The United Earth vessel. Meridian had emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Council space on a warm morning in what humans called the year 2247. It was a small ship by galactic standards, barely larger than a Craxian shuttle, but it moved with a confidence that spoke of a species that did not know its own insignificance. The Council had dispatched a greeting party, and within hours the humans had been brought to the great chamber on the station above. Serena's Prime, Captain Daniel Price, was the first human that Keleth ever saw in person. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a jaw that seemed carved from stone. His uniform was crisp and dark blue, decorated with medals that meant nothing to anyone in the chamber, but clearly meant something to him. He stood at attention before the assembled representatives of 100 worlds, and his hands did not shake. His voice did not waver. He introduced himself and his species with the calm certainty of someone who had faced death before and was not particularly afraid of it. Beside him stood Dr. Maria Santos, the diplomatic liaison. She was smaller than the captain, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was lined with years of careful thought. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the chamber, reading the body language of species she had never encountered before. She spoke with warmth and intelligence, explaining humanity's history and their desire for peaceful relations with the galactic community. Keleth listened to her words, but he was more interested in what she did not say. She spoke of human achievements in science and art. She spoke of their colonies spreading across nearby star systems. She spoke of their hopes for trade and cultural exchange, but she did not hide the darker parts of human history. When the Craxian representative demanded to know about humanity's wars, Maria did not flinch. "We have fought many wars," she admitted. "We have committed terrible acts against each other. We have weapons capable of destroying our own world, and we came very close to using them more than once." The chamber stirred with uncomfortable murmurs. The Craxians exchanged satisfied looks, their scaled faces twisting into expressions of smug contempt. The Mendari delegation shifted nervously on their hovering platforms. Even the crystalline Ineth seemed to dim slightly at this admission, but Keleth leaned forward, his glow shifting to a brighter shade of blue. "And yet you did not use them," he said, speaking for the first time since the humans had entered the chamber. "You came close, but you stopped. Why?" Maria turned to face him directly. There was no fear in her eyes, only a thoughtful consideration that Keleth found refreshing after centuries of dealing with species that either cowered before the Vorath or pretended the ancient beings did not matter, because we chose not to, she said simply. "We looked at what we could become, and we decided to be something better." The vote came 3 days later. After the Council had reviewed humanity's history and technology and asked countless questions about their intentions, the Craxian Empire voted no without hesitation. They called humans dangerous and unpredictable. a violent species that would bring chaos to the carefully maintained order of the galaxy. The Mindari collective abstained, too cautious to commit either way. The Inith voted yes, fascinated by human music and poetry and the strange beauty of their primitive art. The vote stood tied. For species in favor, for against, for abstaining. Everything depended on the Vorath. Keleth rose from his meditation platform, his form cycling through colors that the translation software could not interpret. The chamber fell absolutely silent. In 12,000 years, the Vorath had never been the deciding vote on a species admission. They had always voted with the majority, their voices adding weight to decisions that had already been made. But now every eye in the chamber was fixed on the ancient ambassador. Captain Daniel Price stood rigid, his face betraying nothing. But Keleth could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening of his jaw. This man had faced battle and had not shown fear, but now he was afraid. Not for himself, Keleth realized, but for his people, for the billions of humans back on Earth and the colonies, waiting to learn if they would be welcomed into the galactic community or left alone in the cold darkness between stars. Dr. Maria Santos reached out and touched the captain's arm. A small gesture of comfort that said more about humanity than all her careful diplomatic words. Keleth made his decision. "We vote yes," he said, his bioluminescence shifting to a warm amber that spread across his entire form. "We welcome humanity to the Galactic Council." The chamber erupted. The Craxians shouted protests, their scaled fists pounding against their platforms. The Mindari chittered in confused alarm. The Inith chimed with surprised delight. And the humans simply stood there, Maria's hand still on Daniel's arm, their faces showing a mixture of relief and disbelief. Later, when the ceremony was complete and humanity had been officially recognized as a member species of the Galactic Council, the Craxian ambassador cornered Keleth in a quiet corridor. "You have made a mistake," the Craxian hissed, his yellow eyes narrowing with barely contained rage. "These creatures are violent. They are unpredictable. They will bring war to the galaxy." Keleth regarded the Craxian with the calm patience of a being who had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on a shore. "Perhaps," he said, "but I do not think so. Why? What do you see in them that the rest of us do not?" Keleth was silent for a long moment. His glow dimmed to a thoughtful violet, and his ancient eyes seemed to look at something far beyond the corridor walls. "I see ourselves," he said finally, "as we once were, as we might have been." Before the Craxian could ask what that meant, Keleth turned and drifted away, his form pulsing with colors that no translation software in the galaxy could decode. He moved through the station corridors until he reached an observation deck, where he stopped and gazed out at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was celebrating. They did not know why the Vorath had saved them. They did not know the weight of history that hung upon that single vote. They knew only that they had been welcomed, and that was enough for them. Keleth watched the stars for a long time, thinking about the past and the future, and all the terrible, beautiful potential that lived in the hearts of violent creatures who chose to be kind. He had not felt hope in 12,000 years, but he felt it now, and he was afraid of how much he wanted it to be real. 30 years passed after humanity joined the Galactic Council, and in that time, the Vorath did something they had never done before. They asked to watch. It started small. A few Vorath scientists requested permission to visit Earth and study human culture. Then a delegation asked to observe human schools and hospitals. Then another group wanted to shadow human military officers during training exercises. The requests kept coming year after year until there were Vorath observers on nearly every human colony world and major space station. The other Council species found this strange. The Vorath had never shown such interest in any other civilization. They had existed alongside the Craxians for thousands of years and never once asked to observe their society. They had watched the Mindari build their great hive cities and said nothing. But now they followed humans everywhere, watching everything with their large glowing eyes and saying almost nothing about what they saw. Lieutenant. Commander Kevin Brooks did not understand it either, and he was about to become part of it, whether he liked it or not. Kevin was 32 years old and had spent most of his adult life in the United Earth Navy. He had grown up on a farming colony in the Outer Territories, the son of two agricultural engineers who had wanted him to follow in their footsteps. But Kevin had always looked up at the stars and dreamed of something more. He had enlisted at 18, worked his way through the ranks, and earned a reputation as one of the best pilots in the fleet. He had seen action during the border skirmish with the Craxian Empire 3 years earlier, flying missions that most pilots would have refused. He had medals and commendations, and the respect of his fellow officers. What he did not have was patience for politics. When Admiral Patricia Moore called him into her office on the colony world of New Kansas and told him that a Vorath observer would be shadowing him for 6 months, Kevin did not hide his frustration. "With respect, Admiral," he said, standing at attention before her desk, "I am a combat officer. I run drills and coordinate defense operations. I do not need someone following me around, taking notes." Admiral Moore was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen more battles than Kevin could imagine. She had negotiated peace treaties and commanded fleets and survived things that were still classified, above his clearance level. When she looked at him, Kevin felt like a child who had just said something foolish. "The Vorath have been our strongest allies on the Council for 3 decades, she said, her voice calm but firm. "Ambassador Kelleth himself requested this assignment. You will treat it with the seriousness it deserves, but why me? There are diplomatic officers who would be better suited for this kind of thing. Ambassador Kelleth specifically asked for you. He said he wanted his observer to see a human who had experienced combat, someone who had made difficult choices under pressure." The Admiral leaned back in her chair and studied him. "Apparently your actions during the border skirmish caught their attention." Kevin thought about those missions, the long hours in the cockpit, the split-second decisions that meant life or death, the faces of the pilots he had lost and the ones he had saved. He did not think of himself as special. He had simply done what needed to be done. "I still do not understand what they want from us," he said. "Neither do I," Admiral Moore admitted. "But the Vorath have supported humanity when no one else would. If they want to watch us, we let them watch." Dismissed. The Vorath observer arrived 3 days later. His name was Thiessen, and he was younger than most Vorath that Kevin had encountered. His skin glowed with soft greens and blues that shifted constantly, like sunlight filtering through shallow water. He moved with a grace that seemed almost liquid, and he spoke in a voice so quiet that Kevin had to strain to hear him. For the first 2 months, Thiessen said almost nothing. He simply followed Kevin through his daily routines, watching as he ran training exercises and reviewed supply reports and dealt with the small problems that came with commanding a military outpost on a colony world. He watched Kevin break up fights between soldiers who had been stationed too long in one place. He watched him comfort a young ensign who had received news that her father had died back on Earth. He watched him make difficult decisions about resource allocation and personnel assignments, and through it all, Thiessen just watched. His glow would shift through different colors, patterns that Kevin could not read, and he would make small notes on a device that looked like a piece of living crystal, but he never explained what he was looking for or what he thought about what he saw. Kevin found it unsettling at first, then annoying. Then, gradually, he stopped noticing. Thiessen became like a piece of furniture. It's always present but rarely acknowledged, until the night Kevin found him alone in the observation lounge. It was late, well past midnight station time, and Kevin had been unable to sleep. He often had trouble sleeping, though he never told anyone about the dreams that woke him. Dreams of fire and vacuum and the faces of people he had failed to save. He had walked to the observation lounge hoping to find some peace in the silent stars, and instead he found Thiessen floating before the great window, his form pulsing with a deep violet light that Kevin had never seen before. "I did not mean to disturb you," Kevin said. Starting to turn away, "You are not disturbing me." Thiessen's voice was even quieter than usual. "Please stay." Kevin hesitated, then walked to stand beside the Vorath. They looked out at the stars together in silence for a long moment. The colony world of New Kansas turned slowly below them, its surface dotted with the lights of human settlements. "Can I ask you something?" Kevin said finally. Thiesen's glow shifted to an attentive blue. "You may. Why do your people care so much about us? The Craxians call us savages. Half the council thinks we are going to start a galactic war sooner or later, but the Vorith keep defending us. Keep watching us. I have been trying to figure it out for 2 months, and I still do not understand." Thiesen was silent for so long that Kevin thought he might not answer. Then his form shifted through colors that Kevin had never seen before. A cascade of emotion that the translation software rendered as something between deep sorrow and desperate hope. "Because we see in you what we lost in ourselves," Thiesen said, "and we must know if it can be reclaimed." Kevin opened his mouth to ask what that meant, but before he could speak, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed across the observation lounge, and the calm voice of the station computer announced that multiple hostile vessels had been detected entering the system. Kevin was running before the announcement finished, his body shifting into combat mode without conscious thought. He could hear Thiesen following behind him. The Vorith's soft glow barely visible in the flashing emergency lights. When Kevin reached the command center, the situation was already clear. A Craxian battle fleet had emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. 12 warships, heavily armed, moving toward New Kansas with obvious hostile intent. The border skirmish 3 years ago had never truly ended. It had simply been waiting for this moment. Kevin looked at the tactical display, at the overwhelming force bearing down on his colony, and felt a cold calm settle over him. He had faced death before. He would face it again. Behind him, Thiesen watched with glowing eyes, recording everything, waiting to see what humanity would do when the universe demanded violence. The war had begun. The Craxian War lasted for years, and it changed everything. The first battle at New Kansas should have been a massacre. The Craxians had 12 warships against the colony's 3 defense vessels. They had calculated that a swift, overwhelming assault would crush the human settlement before reinforcements could arrive. They expected the humans to surrender or die quickly. They were wrong. Captain Kevin Brooks flew his fighter into the heart of the Craxian formation on the first day of the war. He led a squadron of 20 pilots against impossible odds, weaving through enemy fire with a skill that the Craxians had never encountered. They lost 8 pilots that day, but they destroyed 4 Craxian warships and forced the enemy fleet to retreat and regroup. It was the first time in 300 years that any species had successfully repelled Craxian surprise attack. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On the diplomatic station above Cernus Prime, Ambassador Kelleth watched the battle reports with Dr. Maria Santos, who had grown old in the decades since first contact but had never lost her sharp mind or her dedication to humanity's place among the stars. "They are fighting back," Kelleth observed, his form cycling through complex patterns as casualty numbers scrolled across the display. "Your people are truly fighting back." "Of course we are," Maria said, her voice tired but proud. "Did you expect us to surrender?" "The Mendari did when the Craxians invaded their outer colonies 2 centuries ago. They calculated the odds and decided that resistance was futile. The Inith negotiated a treaty that cost them 3 star systems rather than risk a single battle. Even the Craxians themselves, when they were young and faced the now extinct Valorian Empire, submitted to slavery rather than risk total destruction." Maria turned to face the ancient Vorith. Her eyes were hard with something that might have been anger or might have been determination. "We are not like the others." "No," Kelleth agreed, his glow shifting to a color that the translation software could not name. "You are not." The war spread across human space like a disease. The Craxians attacked colony after colony, expecting each one to fall like the others had always fallen. And at each one, they found humans who refused to break. On the mining world of Titan 7, a group of engineers held off a Craxian ground assault for 3 weeks, using improvised weapons and booby traps. On the agricultural colony of Greenhaven, farmers took up hunting rifles and fought beside professional soldiers. On the space station above Europa, skeleton crew of technicians deliberately crashed their own station into a Craxian carrier, sacrificing themselves to save the evacuation transports fleeing below. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Species that had known the Croxians for thousands of years could not understand what they were seeing. Humans were dying by the thousands, but they kept fighting. They lost battles but won others. They retreated when they had to, but always came back. They simply refused to accept defeat. Kevin Brooks became a symbol of this resistance. He had been promoted to captain after the first battle at New Kansas. He had held the colony against 3 separate invasion attempts over the following months. The Craxians gave him a name in their own language, a word that translated roughly as the immovable human. They learned to fear his squadron and the cold precision with which he hunted their ships through the darkness between stars. But Kevin did not feel like a hero. He felt tired and worn and haunted by the faces of every pilot he had lost. He kept fighting because there was no other choice, because the alternative was to let the Craxians burn everything he loved. He fought not with joy but with grim determination, and he wondered sometimes if there would be anything left of him when the war finally ended. Thiessen remained at his side throughout it all. The Vorath Observer had been given permission to leave when the war started, but he had refused. He said that his mission was to observe humanity, and he could not do that from the safety of Serenus Prime, so he stayed, watching everything with his glowing eyes and recording it all in his crystal device during the siege of New Kansas. When supplies ran low and reinforcements were still weeks away, Kevin watched something that changed his understanding of his own people. A Craxian bombing run had destroyed a prisoner facility on the edge of the main settlement. The building had held captured Craxian soldiers, enemy combatants who had tried to kill humans just days before. When the bombs fell, most of the prisoners were killed instantly, but some survived, trapped in the rubble and crying out for help. Kevin expected his people to ignore them. The Craxians were the enemy. They had killed thousands of humans. No one would blame the colonists for leaving them to die, but that is not what happened. A young private named Amy Rodriguez was the first to reach the rubble. She was barely 20 years old, with short brown hair and a face still soft with youth. She had lost her brother in the first battle at New Kansas. She had every reason to hate the Craxians. But when she heard their cries for help, she did not hesitate. She climbed into the burning wreckage and started pulling survivors out. Other soldiers followed her. Medics who had been working 30-hour shifts treating human wounded came to treat Craxian wounded instead. Engineers who had been repairing defensive systems stopped their work to dig through rubble. Within an hour, a chain of humans was passing injured Craxians to safety, risking their lives to save their enemies. Kevin stood and watched. Unable to speak, Thiessen appeared beside him, his form pulsing with a light that seemed almost painful in its intensity. "Why are they doing this?" the Vorath asked, his voice filled with something that sounded like confusion and wonder mixed together. "The Craxians have killed thousands of your people. Those prisoners belong to the army that attacked this colony. Why would your soldiers risk their lives to save them?" Kevin watched Amy Rodriguez emerge from the rubble, carrying a Craxian child. The young alien was barely old enough to hold a weapon, probably a cadet who had been captured during the last ground assault. Its scales were burned and its eyes were wide with terror. Amy held it gently, like she would hold a human child, and carried it to a medic, who began treating its wounds without hesitation. "Because the kid did not start this war," Kevin said quietly, "and Amy is not going to let herself become the kind of person who hurts children. No matter what uniform their parents wore." Thiessen was silent for a long moment. His glow shifted through colors that Kevin had come to recognize as deep emotion, patterns that the translation software could never fully capture. "This is what we needed to see," the Vorath said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is why we chose you." Kevin turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" But Thiessen did not answer. He simply watched as humans continued to pull Craxians from the rubble, as medics treated enemy wounded alongside their own, as soldiers who had lost friends and family showed mercy to the very species that had caused their suffering. The war would continue for 3 more years. There would be more battles, and more death, and more moments when humanity showed both its capacity for violence and its capacity for compassion. But Kevin would always remember this night. This moment when he understood that humanity was fighting for something more than survival. They were fighting to prove that strength and kindness could exist in the same. And somewhere in the galaxy, an ancient species was watching to see if they could succeed. The war ended not with destruction, but with mercy. In the 4th year of the conflict, humanity launched a daring assault on the Craxian homeworld itself. The galaxy expected genocide. The Craxians had burned human colonies and killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Every other species in galactic history had responded to such attacks with total annihilation. It was the way of things. You hurt us, we destroy you. The cycle had repeated itself for millions of years. But humanity did something different, Captain. Kevin Brooks led the fighter squadron that breached the Craxian planetary defenses. He had spent 4 years fighting this war, watching friends die, making impossible choices in the darkness between stars. He had every reason to want revenge. He had every justification for hatred. But when his squadron broke through the orbital defense grid and the Craxian homeworld lay vulnerable below them, he did not give the order to bomb their cities. Instead, he targeted only military installations, command centers, weapons factories, defense platforms. He destroyed their ability to make war while leaving their civilian population untouched. When Craxian escape pods launched from damaged military stations, human ships picked them up and took them prisoner instead of shooting them down. The Craxian High Command surrendered within a week. They had expected death and received mercy. They did not know how to respond to an enemy who could have destroyed them but chose not to. Dr. Maria Santos negotiated the peace treaty. She was old now, her hair completely white, and her face lined with decades of service to humanity. But her mind was still sharp. Her words still carried the weight of someone who understood that peace was harder than war. She demanded that the Craxians pay reparations for the colonies they had destroyed. She demanded that they release all human prisoners and return all occupied territory. But she did not demand their submission. She did not take their worlds or enslave their people. She gave them a path back to dignity, and she made them understand that humanity wanted neighbors, not subjects. The galaxy was stunned. Species that had watched the war unfold could not believe what they were seeing. Humanity had won, completely and totally, and they were not using their victory to dominate or destroy. They were offering peace. 6 months after the treaty was signed, Ambassador Kelleth sent a message to both Kevin and Maria. He requested that they come to Serenus's Prime for a private meeting. He said there was something they needed to see, something that would explain everything. Kevin arrived first. He had been promoted to admiral after the war, but he did not feel like an admiral. He felt like a tired man who had seen too much death and wanted nothing more than to rest. The shuttle that brought him down to the Varoth homeworld was quiet and smooth, and through the windows he could see a world that seemed to glow with inner light. Serenus Prime was beautiful beyond anything Kevin had ever seen. The cities were not built from metal and stone, but seemed to grow from the land itself, organic structures that twisted toward the sky like living things. The Vorath moved through these spaces with slow grace, their bodies pulsing with soft colors that painted the air around them. There was no noise, no rush, no conflict. Everything was peaceful in a way that felt almost unnatural. Maria arrived an hour later. She embraced Kevin when she saw him, this young man she had watched grow from a nervous pilot to a war hero to something more. They had never been close during the war, separated by duty and distance, but they shared a bond now. They had both seen what humanity could be at its best and its worst. Ambassador Kelleth met them at the landing platform. He looked the same as he had 30 years ago, his form glowing with deep indigo and his movements slow with ancient patience. But there was something different in his eyes now, something that Kevin could not name. "Thank you for coming," Kelleth said. "What I am about to show you is known to only a handful of Voreth alive today. We have kept this secret for 12,000 years. He led them away from the beautiful cities, down into tunnels that seemed carved from living rock. They walked for what felt like hours, descending deeper and deeper into the planet until Kevin lost all sense of direction. Finally, they reached a vast chamber sealed by doors that looked older than human civilization itself. "What is this place?" Maria asked. "Our history," Keleth said. "Our truth." The doors opened, and Kevin felt his blood turn to ice. The walls of the chamber were covered in murals, ancient images painted with pigments that still glowed after thousands of years, and every image showed violence. Vorath, killing Vorath. Voroth, burning cities. Vorath, standing over the bodies of alien species with weapons raised in triumph. The images showed armies and weapons and destruction on a scale that made the HFY War look like a minor skirmish. "This was us," Keleth said, his voice heavy with shame that seemed to bend the air around him. "Before we became what we are now, we were the greatest terror the galaxy had ever known." Kevin could not speak. He stared at the murals, at images of the peaceful Vorath, committing atrocities that made his stomach turn. He saw worlds burning. He saw species in chains. He saw a civilization built on conquest and cruelty, an endless hunger for more. "We destroyed 17 species entirely," Keleth continued. "We erased them from existence so completely that no one remembers their names. We enslaved dozens more. We waged war for 3,000 years, spreading across the galaxy like a disease until there was no one left to fight." Maria found her voice first. "But you are the most peaceful species in the galaxy. Everyone knows that. You have not had a war in 12,000 years, because we chose to end it." Keleth's glow dimmed to almost nothing, his form shrinking with the weight of what he was saying. "When our ancestors finally stopped and looked at what they had become, they were horrified. They had conquered everything, destroyed everything, and they were left with nothing but emptiness and shame. So they made a decision." He moved to a mural that showed Voroth scientists working on strange machines, their forms surrounded by light. They used genetic engineering and technology to change themselves. They rewrote their own minds, their own bodies. They removed every violent impulse, every aggressive instinct. They made themselves physically and mentally incapable of harming another living being. Kevin finally understood. "You did not evolve to be peaceful. You made yourselves peaceful." "Yes. We cut out a part of ourselves because we could not trust ourselves to control it." Keleth turned to face them. His ancient eyes filled with something that looked like grief. "And for 12,000 years, we have lived with the consequences." "What consequences?" Maria asked. "You created paradise. Your world has no war, no violence, no suffering, and no ability to stop suffering when we see it." Keleth's glow flickered with pain. "When the Craxians rose to power, we could not stop them. When they threatened our allies, we could not fight. When species begged us for protection, we could only offer words and sympathy. We made ourselves unable to harm anyone, but we also made ourselves unable to protect anyone." The chamber fell silent. Kevin looked at the murals, at the record of what the Vorath had been, and what they had chosen to become. He thought about all the times during the war when he had wished he could stop feeling, stop caring, stop being affected by the violence around him. He had envied the Vorath their peace. Now he understood what that peace had cost them. "You have been watching us for 30 years, Kevin said slowly. "You were looking for something." "Yes." Keleth's form brightened slightly with something that looked like hope. "We were looking for proof that there was another way, that a species could hold violence in their hearts and still choose kindness. That strength and mercy could exist together." He looked at Kevin and Maria with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall for 12,000 years. "And in humanity, we finally found it." Kevin and Maria stood in the ancient chamber surrounded by 12,000 years of hidden shame. The murals glowed softly around them, showing the terrible history of a species that had once drowned the galaxy in blood. Neither of them knew what to say. It was Maria who broke the silence first. She had spent her entire adult life as a diplomat, learning to find words when words seemed impossible. But even she struggled now. "You cured yourselves of violence," she said slowly, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You looked at what you were, and you changed it. That sounds like a triumph, not a tragedy." Keleth moved toward a mural showing Voreth children playing in fields of soft light. His form pulsed with colors that seemed to carry the weight of ages. "Does it?" he asked. "When we made ourselves peaceful, we believed we were saving the galaxy from ourselves. And perhaps we were. But we did not understand what we were giving up." He turned to face them, his ancient eyes reflecting the glow of the painted walls. "When the Craxians first began their conquests, our allies came to us for help. They remembered that we had once been the mightiest warriors in the galaxy. They begged us to fight, to protect the innocent, to stand against tyranny." His glow dimmed with sorrow, and we could not. We physically could not. Our ancestors had removed that ability so completely that even the thought of violence causes us pain. We watched species suffer and die, and all we could do was offer comfort and words. Kevin thought about the war he had just survived. He thought about the moments when violence had been necessary, and fighting was the only thing standing between innocent people and destruction. He thought about Amy Rodriguez pulling Craxian children from rubble, choosing mercy in the middle of battle. She had the ability to harm and the ability to help. And she had chosen help. He thought we might be different. He said, "We hoped."
Us.
Koloth's form brightened with something that looked fragile and precious. "For 12,000 years, we have watched species rise and fall. The violent ones destroy themselves or others. The peaceful ones are destroyed by others. We never found a species that could hold both impulses in balance. We never found proof that what we did to ourselves was not the only way." He moved closer to Kevin and Maria, his glow shifting through colors that seemed to speak of emotions too complex for any translation software to capture. And then humanity appeared. A species that had fought terrible wars against itself and then chose to stop. A species that developed weapons capable of destroying their own world and then agreed not to use them. A species that carried violence in their hearts, but also carried something else. Something we had lost. "Compassion," Maria said quietly. "More than that. Choice." Keleth's voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the chamber. "You have the ability to destroy. You have the strength to conquer. You could have burned the Craxian homeworld to ash and no one in the galaxy would have blamed you. But you chose mercy. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to." Kevin remembered standing in the command center of his ship, looking down at the Craxian homeworld. He remembered the anger he had felt, the grief for all the friends he had lost, the burning desire for revenge. He remembered how easy it would have been to give the order that would have ended the Craxian species forever. And he remembered choosing not to. "We are not perfect," he said. "We still fight. We still kill. We make mistakes and we hurt each other, and sometimes we fail to be the people we want to be." "Yes," Keleth agreed. "And that is what makes you beautiful." Kevin blinked, not understanding. "We Voreth cannot fail," Keleth explained. "We cannot choose wrong because we cannot choose at all. Our ancestors removed the possibility of violence, but in doing so, they also removed the possibility of choosing peace. We are peaceful because we have no other option. It is not virtue. It is simply what we are." He reached out one translucent limb and touched Kevin gently on the shoulder. The contact was warm and light, like sunlight on water. "But you can choose. Every day, every moment, you face the option of violence or peace, cruelty or kindness, destruction or creation. And every time you choose kindness, it means something. It matters. Because you could have chosen differently." Maria wiped tears from her eyes. She had spent 30 years wondering why the Voreth had supported humanity, why they had defended them against the skepticism of the Council, why they had watched so closely for so long. Now she understood. "Yes. You voted for us because you saw hope," she said. "Yes, we saw a species that might prove there was another way. That peace does not require surrendering the ability to fight. That strength and mercy can live in the same heart." Keleth's glow shifted to a warm amber that filled the chamber with gentle light. "We supported humanity because you gave us something we had not felt in 12,000 years. You gave us hope that we did not make a mistake, that there might be a better path than the one we chose." They left the chamber together, walking back through the ancient tunnels toward the surface. The journey felt shorter somehow, as if the weight of the secret they now carried had changed the very nature of time around them. When they emerged into the sunlight of Serenus Prime, Kevin took a deep breath of the sweet alien air. Around them, Vorath moved through their beautiful city, their bodies pulsing with soft, peaceful colors. They looked content. They looked happy. But Kevin now saw the sadness beneath their calm, the price they had paid for their tranquility. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go back to your people," Kellett said. "You continue to build and grow and make choices. And we will continue to watch. Just watch. It is all we can do." There was no bitterness in Kellett's voice, only acceptance. But perhaps that is enough. Perhaps watching is its own form of hope. Maria took Kevin's arm as they walked toward the shuttle that would carry them back to human space. She was quiet for a long time, her mind turning over everything they had learned. "Do you think we can live up to what they see in us?" she asked finally. Kevin watched a group of Vorath children playing in a garden nearby. Their forms pulsed with innocent light as they chased each other through flowers that seemed to sing. They would never know war. They would never know violence. They would never face the terrible choices that Kevin had faced his entire adult life, and they would never know the feeling of choosing mercy when destruction was easier. They would never understand what it meant to have the power to harm and the wisdom to hold back. They would never experience the painful, beautiful weight of being responsible for their own souls. "I do not know," Kevin admitted. "We have failed before. We will probably fail again. There will be more wars and more violence and more moments when we choose wrong." He looked up at the sky, at the stars that burned with the light of 1,000 civilizations. Somewhere out there, humanity was building and dreaming and making all the mistakes and miracles that came with being alive. "I think we have to try," he said. "Not for the Vorath. Not for the galaxy. For ourselves. Because the ability to choose is the most precious thing we have, and we cannot waste it." Maria squeezed his arm and smiled. It was a tired smile, a smile of someone who had spent a lifetime working for peace and knew that the work would never truly be finished. "Then let us go home," she said, "and let us try." Above them, the stars waited. The Vorath watched, and humanity continued its long journey through the universe, carrying all its flaws and all its potential. Making choices that mattered because they could have chosen differently. It was not perfection. It was something better. It was hope.